Cindy, today we're going to speak about homeschool critics and how to handle people who are skeptical or even outright sort of challenging your decision to start homeschooling. And we're going to think back to when we first started and then also just share the things that you and I have learned from other people on the way. But it's often people get challenged by the grandparents of the family or your own siblings, the aunties and uncles of your children. And then sometimes it's even your close friends. And then, of course, you get comments from strangers like librarians and, checkout people at the supermarket. So let's start and talk first about our intimate family, because that's often the hardest group to discuss this with if they're not on board with your decision. What happened when you started?
That was, looking back now, it was quite comical, but at the time it was devastating, because you're starting to swim against the stream. And look, we're talking about 25 years ago. So the environment is slightly different now, but the critics have remained. But so back in the day, here you are starting out, you're a little bit wobbly yourself, and then the people that are nearest and dearest to you tell you that you're going to ruin your children and take away their opportunities for further study. And it's really not the environment that you want to find yourself in, because yeah, you're already feeling a bit shaky. So I had the added benefit of not being able to do maths so good. And the first question my father asked was, so who's going to be teaching them maths? And it was a valid question, and it did leave me floored for a bit. And then I thought, you know what? I'm now a 24-year-old woman. I'm sure I can get my head around grade 1 maths, and then the next year I can get my head around grade 2 maths. So I kind of took a step back from that comment. And within a couple of years, my parents, and in fact my parents-in-law, who also had concerns about homeschooling, they became the greatest advocates for it. And my father-in-law at the time was a valuer in the Overberg region for one of the banks. And he would speak to all of his clients about the amazing things that his daughter-in-law was doing with his grandchildren, and they should consider homeschooling. So it was actually a lovely turnaround. But I think that I remember saying to myself, and after my husband kind of put the boundary in with the parents and the in-laws, that actually our parents love their grandchildren probably second in line to us, and they really are just concerned. There might be one or two where there is difficult relationships, and it might be, quite acidic, but in general, they really do love their grandchildren. How did you find navigating that with your folks and parents-in-law?
Yeah, well, with my own parents, we visited them, and I think after I'd shared how much I'd read about homeschooling, they realized that I'd done my research and that I was well informed, and they figured, I could do it. With my in-laws, they were initially, also skeptical because it was, as you say, it was so unusual at that time in 1997. It wasn't sort of the semi-mainstream movement like it is today. And they were wondering how I was going to cope if I had children of my own, because I started out with my stepdaughter, who was about 5 or 6 at the time. And but with them, like you say, within a year or so, they saw that, the child is learning, we are coping, and they quickly changed their attitude because they weren't that sold out on the school system themselves anyway. And what I think you touched on is that anybody's grandparents are normally expressing concern, even if it comes out as an attack. And a person needs to just maybe validate that and say to them, we appreciate your concern for our grandchildren, but we've really made this decision thoughtfully, we've researched it, and we've decided that it's the best thing for our children. And we know that you may not have done this with us as children or with your kids, but the school system is also not the same as it used to be when you made the choices for your children. And just sort of let that filter through. And then a good point that another person pointed out to me is that often the grandparents, like your father-in-law, they actually need to be able to say something when their peer group asks them, what school is your grandson in? Is he going to play rugby for the old boys team? Or is he going to, and they don't know what to say because they don't know much about homeschooling. So sometimes you need to give them information that they can then confidently share with their bridge club or their bowls club or their circle that they move in, who might also be wondering, wow, this is a weird decision. Why are they doing that? And then they don't know what to say. They feel stupid themselves. So empower them, and then they'll probably become your biggest advocates eventually.
Oh, that's a very good point. Very good point. And the other thing is that we often in consultations and just expos or emails, we have parents saying, we want to homeschool, but our family is a very academic family. Or my sister or brother-in-law, sister or brother, they're teachers, and that's another space, another arena that is very challenging to navigate, because what happens is that when you choose to homeschool, it's almost as though you are other people perceive it as a judgment against their choice to send their children to school. They're saying, why do you think you are so special that you don't go and study for 5 years and do a teaching degree, and now you just think that you can homeschool your children? And I think that really speaks to the difference in understanding between what is schooling and what is education. There are two completely different things. To run a school class and to be involved in school education, yeah, you need to go and figure out and get your degree or
Yeah.
your diploma to know how to crowd manage. Really, in when it's your own children, it's a completely different thing. It's a pursuit of knowledge, and helping them to gain their own education. And if you can kind of find a way to navigate those differences with your more academic family. But then again, as you said, there's some people that are just not going to get it, and they're going to remain in the critic camp. And there's nothing that you can really do about changing their mindset. And I don't think that you should put energy into trying to get people to change their minds like that. You put your blinkers on, do what you need to do every day. Be faithful in your own home with your own children. Let their lives and your lives speak for themselves and silence the critics. One of the saddest things is to see families being torn apart by these minor issues, because it really is. We don't need to convince anybody else. Outside of
Yeah.
family, how did you handle critics? So maybe in the community, like you mentioned in the beginning, the tellers and the receptionists.
Well, often, before we even get to those kind of strangers, often even in social circles, people
Yeah.
will sort of be challenging your decision. And I came to realize that they were attacking me because they felt that I was rejecting what they had chosen for their children.
Yes.
And so they felt judged, and they felt a need to defend their choice because they weren't, this dedicated mother like you, Wendy, that's going to stay at home and nurture your little children. They actually feel a bit of guilt maybe that they're not doing what you're doing. So they would attack. And to just sort of diffuse that tension in a social situation, I would say something like, well, every family's got to do what they think is best for their children. And I know not everybody's going to homeschool, or it doesn't work for everybody. I sort of give them a way out.
Yeah.
And then they'd be like, okay, she's not expecting that all of us should be doing what they've chosen. And that sometimes helped. But you touched on something where you said that your husband set a boundary. And I've counseled some people, and I've said to them, with some people, you just have to say to them, this is what we've decided, and I can tell you more if you want to know. But if you don't agree, you have to agree to disagree. And you just get some backbone and you set that boundary and ask them to please respect our choice, even if it's not what you would choose for your own family. And in most cases, that works. People will only push you as far as you allow them to.
Oh,
So that worked. With people that I had no relationship with, it didn't matter to me. Sometimes you could just laugh it off. Sometimes I would try and use the opportunity to actually educate them, because I realized that a lot of these questions are actually based on ignorance. People make assumptions that your children are never going to be socialized. They assume that they're never going to get matric. So they ask you questions that seem like they're challenging you, but it's actually because they don't know anything. So if I had time, I would try and preempt that and just tell them the truth bombs that they need to hear, but sometimes you just leave it.
Yeah,
How are your friends?
Yeah, sidestep it. Well, luckily, luckily most of my friends were in our church, and we all attended the same presentation back in the day, and most of
Okay.
us decided to homeschool together. So, there were 5 of us at that stage in Cape Town that we knew of, and we just formed a little support group. So that was fine. Yeah, no, it wasn't really so much that. And I think maybe before we go broader, you've also got your internal critic. Let's not forget that inner critic, and we probably should address that in a separate video, because we can sometimes do ourselves more injustice than what people on the outside can. So that's something I think for
Yes. Oh,
another day.
yes.
Yeah.
What about people like sports coaches or, tutors and ballet teachers? Did you have any conflict in those kind of situations?
Not so much in the sports space, but at one time we had to take our son for occupational therapy. And unfortunately, she spent more of her time telling me that he would succeed better in a school. And I couldn't get my head around that. How would one child in a group of 35 get more attention than one mom with 4 children? So what we decided is that, being an unhealthy space for me, we asked her for a home program, and we did the stuff at home, and it didn't set our son back at all. In fact, it allowed me much more flexibility, and I built it into our homeschooling days. So, and then it saved you from, first of all, the expense of OT, which is ridiculous, and then also the time going back and forth, because you don't do OT once a week. So it worked out, but it was there is a need often for interventions and that sort of thing. And if that's the situation in any of our listeners' homes, just make sure that you find an OT that is more sympathetic towards homeschooling. And there are, often we do consultations and parents will say the teacher has said that the child needs to be in a home environment, which is lovely to actually see that the tide is turning for many
Yes.
families.
Yeah. But it's good that you point out that it's actually for your mental health that you needed to remove yourself from that situation, because otherwise you're always trying to prove to that person that what you're doing is enough, and it ends up being detrimental to your children because of what's going on in your own headspace. You're not doing what's best for them. You're doing what's best for you to confront that person.
Yeah.
And it sort of shifts your focus a little bit.
Yeah.
So a person needs to just be aware of that. Even with homeschooling, I can remember feeling so good once there was evidence that children had started to learn to read or they could do maths. And you actually start out with your first children and you perhaps put more pressure on them than you need to, because you're proving to yourself and those critics that this homeschooling thing is working. So just be aware of that, and try not to let that be put pressure on you, because they are going to learn it all in time eventually. You don't have to rush them, especially the first one.
I was going to say it's our guinea pig children is our first children, and they do take.
Yeah.
And then just in the casual, relationships that we have with people that perhaps you are popping into a shop on a school morning and your children are with you, and the tellers, oh, are your children sick? They're not in school. Well, it's kind of like, well, is that really any of your business? Is the first question. But it's actually fun to educate and to say, no,
Yeah.
we homeschool and we're on a shopping trip and they're learning a whole lot of different things while we're out. That's a great
Yeah.
answer. Or, just no, we're homeschooling. Before the whole registration, and I might clip this out, but before the whole registration issue, we used to feel like we were playing hooky all the time. Now, if you are, if you are registered as a homeschooler and you are able to embrace all of life as learning, your trip to the grocery store becomes, an education in consumer buyer and marketing and advertising and maths and science, so you can choose to educate the teller, or you can just say, no, we homeschool and move on, not let it
Yeah.
to you. Yeah. Anything you want
Well,
to
I think we've covered all the most common situations where a person does get confronted or challenged. And I think these answers will help other people to just, feel more resolute in what they're going to say to people. Well done.